an Australian friend of mine told me that there were a few people who had started Christian surfers in Southwest France. I would not believe him. I was like, I don't believe you. In France, you cannot be a Christian and a surfer.
I know, right? It's like
they don't go together. Well, I thought I was the only Christian surfer in France. Well, no. So let's join forces together.
Hey guys, and aloha. It's Mark Sawyer Chu.
And AJ Ellerington.
Together we'll be hosting the Christian Surfers Podcast,
where we talk Jesus
and talk with surfers that love Jesus.
Tune in to hear some amazing stories. So today I am joined by an incredible guest, Miss Audrey Harrison. I am so grateful to have you with us. So Audrey, I've known you since I was about 8 years old because we moved to France to plant a surf church. Now I would like you to tell me a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and just a bit of backstory.
So I'm French.
Yeah.
There aren't many French people living in Hossegor, right? I grew up outside Paris and far from the beach. And a friend of mine, when I was 13 years old, started coming to school with a surfing magazine. And that's how I got to know surfing, through his magazines. And every day we would look at his magazines, look at the waves. And I just fell in love with the waves and surfing through his magazine. And that's the first time I went to the West Coast and tried surfing that summer at the age of 13.
So tell me a bit about how you grew up in terms of your family and your Christianity. Was that something that was present, or was that something that you discovered later on in your life?
I didn't grow up in a Christian family. My parents thought that Christian values were good values. So they would take us to catechism when we were young, where we would learn about the Bible once a week with other kids. But my dad was actually interested in any kind of spirituality. I did grow up in a family where spirituality was something, but not specifically Christianity. And fast forward 30 years later, I'm now the national coordinator for Christian surfers in France.
Throughout that time, how did you come to know Jesus?
So at the age of 13, I fell in love with surfing through a surfing magazine. And I had that desire in my heart to move to a country where I could learn English and go surfing. And finally, at the age of 17, I was able to go to Australia for a year.
Wow.
To live with an Australian family where I could learn English and go to an Australian high school and surf. And I got in touch with an exchange student organization that found a family for me in Sydney. And the father of the family was the pastor of the local Baptist church. And I lived with him and his wife for a year. And in their church, there was a very strong Christian surfers chapter in Maroubra, in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. There was a very strong, on fire Christian surfers local chapter. This is where it all started.
And so when you kind of looked at what they were doing, were you like, oh, this is kind of weird? Or were you like, wow, this is what I want to do one day? What was your perspective?
Mixed feelings. The very first Sunday I walked into the church during the service, I was like, wow, what is that? There's a drum kit on stage. There are 3 singers. People are clapping. People are singing. People are dancing. And on the left-hand side of the church, there were 10, 15 surfboards. I could see that lots of the guys and lots of the girls in the room were in flip-flops and boat shorts. And I got introduced to the Christian Surfer crew that same night. And I was like, wow, it's amazing. I've never seen that in my life. But on the other hand, what is that? So mixed feelings, really.
So you went back to France, and then what ignited your passion to begin something within the French culture? Did that happen all of a sudden? How did you kickstart this incredible movement?
So about a year after I first arrived in Maroubra, so I was still living in Maroubra in Sydney, I was wondering, okay, what am I going to do? Should I stay in Sydney and study in Australia, or should I go back home? And I really had the strong desire to go back to France and bring in France what I had discovered in Australia. So I went back to France, but it's only several years later that an Australian friend of mine told me that there were a few people who had started Christian surfers in Southwest France. I would not believe him. I was like, I don't believe you. In France, you cannot be a Christian and a surfer.
I know, right? It's like
they don't go together. You know, in France, Christianity is very traditional, and surfing is very non-traditional. So I kept telling him, my friend is Danny Boyd from Maroubra. He now lives on the south coast of New South Wales. For a while, I told him, no, I can't believe you. There is not Christian surfers in France. And he was like, there is. I know that because it's an Australian family who started it. They've started it not long ago. You should go and connect with them. And I found a phone number, and it was Christophe and Melissa's phone number. Christophe and Melissa Parenti, who were Australians that had moved to France to pioneer Christian surfers in France.
What are some of the difficulties that have come with being part of a Christian surfer, specifically in France?
So, funny enough, every now and then I meet people who have a similar story, and who tell me that for several years they thought they were the only Christian and surfer in France. And they are amazed when they discover that they're not, when they find out that they're not the only Christian surfer in France. And they are drawn very quickly to the ministry of Christian surfers. Like they can identify to Christian surfers and to the Christian surfers people quite quickly. So that's very interesting to have these people all around the country who tell us, well, I thought I was the only Christian surfer in France. Well, no. So let's join forces together. We have our challenges, but I think the people were ready. I think people were ready for Christian surfers to grow.
Oh, I love that. What you just said. People are ready. People are wanting to connect and be part of something. So how did you go from having a local chapter in the southwest of France to now a national ministry?
So for several years, the local chapter was in Biarritz and Hossegor. The chapter went through a quiet time, and after a couple of years of quiet time, somebody came and told me, hey, Audrey, I've met other Christians who surf in other parts of the country. You have to go on the road and meet them because you guys are Christian surfers. So you need to go and meet them. And it had been a desire in our hearts to travel, to hit the road and go and see who got put in on our path, but we had never done it. And when the friend told us to go, I really felt like it was the green light from God. Okay, now is the time. Now a national ministry is going to start. So we decided to drive. So we didn't have kids back then. And there was a couple from the UK, Joby and Vicky Wells, who were spending a year in France trying to help Christian surfers and surf church. And we went on the road with them. And we just traveled for days and days. We started with the Med. And before we left, we had sent emails and we had made phone calls to several people. And we had no positive answer. Nobody knew other Christians who surfed. Nobody had anything
that must have been discouraging
to tell us. Well, we were a bit amazed. We were like, wow, okay, let's still hit the road. But we were like, why is that not working out? And as we drove day after day, we started having phone calls. We started receiving emails, replies to our emails saying, hey, I know a guy in that church. He's a surfer. Hey, I know a Christian who's got a surf shop in whatever spot. I know a priest, a Catholic priest, who is a windsurfer. So as we drove, answers were arriving, and we were like, wow, this is crazy. So we spent a bit less than a week traveling on the Med, and then we came home, and then we went up the Atlantic coast and did the same thing, made phone calls, contacted churches, contacted friends, contacted friends of friends of friends, and we started hitting the road, and the same thing happened. You have to meet that person, you have to meet that person. I heard there's a Christian surfer in that town. Yeah, and that's how it all started.
The dots started to collide, huh?
Yes.
Is there anything looking back that you regret or would have done differently?
There is something that I would have done differently, but it was a bit later, not right at the beginning, is when I encountered opposition, I spent too much time and energy focusing on that instead of dealing with it and then keep walking. So that's something that I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Not to think about it day and night and over and over again, but just put that on the side and keep walking. A couple times I felt like I've wasted my time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still learning.
Yes.
It's a long process.
What is one piece of valuable advice you would give to people who are starting out a new CS chapter or a CS mission in a place where it's difficult to find other Christian surfers?
One advice I would give is find the right people to walk alongside you, and don't hesitate to ask for help and to ask them. That's something I did in the very early days. I thought, wow, this is big. If we're going to make a national ministry out of our tiny little local chapter in the Southwest France, we need the right people. And I need the right people to walk alongside me and help me set the right foundation.
Well, thank you so much, Audrey, for being on the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here with us. Next time we need to do this in French, okay?
We will.
It's a deal.
Definitely.
Definitely. Yes, thank you everyone who joined in. I can't wait to have you on the next one. Enjoy!